Good evening. I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for May 15th, 2023. We have one action item, or agenda item on our agenda tonight is a discussion on our neighborhood traffic management plan, an update on that. And we'll start our meeting as we usually do with hearing from members of our public. If you're here and would like to speak on this agenda item at our study session, the traffic management plan, you may do so now. I don't have anyone signed up to speak, but if you're here in City Hall, you may come to the podium and speak now, and we'll see if anyone is joining us online and would like to speak. If you are, you would raise your hand and we'll bring you into the meeting. And I don't
No, Mr. Mayor,
think we have anybody joining us for public comment, so let us move right to agenda item number one, the neighborhood traffic management plan update. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited to bring this forward to you. This was directed by City Council to bring back an update on this, and then also to look at some solutions for our school safety with the closure of 2 schools. So we have some recommendations on providing safe routes to school also. So Lauren, are you going to start this?
Just briefly, yeah, thanks. So it was a long memo that in hindsight we probably could have made into 2 memos. So we're gonna, if it's okay, we're gonna format the meeting, talk about NTMP, pause for that discussion, and then talk about the schools. And we can even do one school and then the next if that helps break this down into more digestible pieces. Jordan Jeffries from our engineering division and Ashley Holland from our planning division are leading the charge tonight, bringing their combined expertise in engineering and engagement, which is really sort of the crux of the NTMP. So I'm gonna cue the slides and then turn it over to both of them.
Put my sunscreen on.
Uh-oh, better watch.
All right, well, I will kick off the discussion on the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program update. I think last year, council and staff both realized that the program wasn't working very well. Wasn't very efficient for staff, and the residents weren't really getting the results, good results. So late last year in the fall, the program was put on hold, and we reevaluated it and modified it to make it more efficient for residents and staff. I'll talk briefly about the history of the program and the current program, and then I'll turn it over to Ashley to talk a little bit about the proposed redesign. So the program kicked off in 1997. It was revised then in 2002. We don't have really good information.
It's in there. Oh, it's not moving with arrows even. Pros. There we go. I bet it's working now.
Lazy slides tonight.
There we go. Stop recording.
All right, sorry about that. So the program kicked off in 1997, and it was revised 5 years later in 2002. We don't really have good information on what the program was like before 2002, but the 2002 program was very prescriptive. It was a scoring system and weighted on speeds and volumes and geometry of the roadway. It was kind of complicated. In 2009, the program went offline, I think because of the financial crisis and funding shortages, probably staff shortages to some extent as well. It was reinitiated in 2014 and revamped to make it simpler. And that was the program we had been using through 2022. So the program, before it was put on hold in 2022, had 53 segments enrolled over those 8 years. And of the 53 segments, 16 segments were successful in getting traffic calming installed. Again, prior to 2009, we don't really have good records, so I don't have stats on what was done prior to then. This is a map showing all the improvements that have been installed through the NTMP. A lot of symbols on there. So the black triangles are asphalt speed humps. The orange pentagons are concrete speed humps, and then the green dots are planners, which are medians or chicanes, horizontal traffic calming. And then you can see the schools on there as well. As you'll notice, most of the areas around the existing schools have already been treated, particularly Wilmore Davis. There's a lot of traffic calming around Prospect. And then you can see a lot of the cut-through corridors around town have already been treated as well. So the current NTMP process, the segment is enrolled when a resident files a request with us, and that requires 5 signatures from property owners along that segment. Once we get that, we do an engineering evaluation, which involves speed and volume data collection when we put the hoses out on the roadway, review of the accident history, and then an analysis of geometric features, signage, and ped and bike facilities. So typically any street with a 85th percentile speed that's greater than the speed limit is eligible for traffic calming, or if there's an accident pattern that's attributable to speed, which is pretty rare on our local streets. We do have speeding, but it doesn't often translate to accidents. Once we've established the eligibility, we have a neighborhood meeting. We've been doing those online the last few years, starting when the pandemic happened. And we require generally a consensus from that meeting that people on the call want to move forward with a plan. So if we get that consensus, generally 50% or greater, we'll go ahead and develop a plan. And then we submit that to the resident representative, and they're required to go get 80% signature, 80% of all the property owners along that segment must sign. And then in addition to that, any property owners that are directly adjacent to a speed hump must sign as well. So I'll talk about that a bit in the next slide, but that's been a problem for us. It causes a lot of rework. So these are some of the issues with the current NTMP process, or the process that was put on hold in 2022. Thank you. The resident selects the segment. So this sometimes can be a problem. For example, if we're looking at a street from 32nd to 38th, and they only want to treat the segment from 32nd to 34th, that can just push the speeding problem further down the street. People will slow down on those speed humps and then speed up when there's no speed humps. So ideally, we could weigh in on what the segment should be. There's also significant staff time involved. We have individual neighborhood meetings for every segment. Often they aren't very productive, and we start talking about other issues. We have to revise the treatment locations. Like I mentioned, that requirement for the property owners adjacent to the speed hump must sign. So sometimes somebody will change their mind, and we have to move the speed hump, and then they don't want it, and we have to move it again. And there's kind of a narrow range of spacing that you want for speed humps, so it makes it kind of tricky to site these sometimes. We've had one project went on for 2 years while we were trying to find a suitable layout for the speed humps. We also have to verify and coordinate signature collection, help residents track down property owners, can be time consuming. And then often we'll prepare plans for a segment that doesn't get the 80% approval, so it's all just kind of for naught. We spend a lot of time and then the project doesn't get approved. Residents are also frustrated with the approval process. The longer segments, they have to get a lot of signatures to meet that 80%. Parfait Street had a pretty significant speeding problem, and they just gave up because it was too hard to track down owners and get signatures over a 4-block segment. Also, speed humps are installed sometimes where they may not be warranted. If we have an 85th percentile speed of 25.1, technically that's eligible, but really a speed hump probably isn't going to do a lot of good there. And on the flip side, we have speed humps where they are warranted. The neighbors can't get the 80% approval. So that's also a problem. And then lastly, just the lack of the timeline, the formal timeline can be frustrating for residents. Can take a while to get these projects approved. So that's it for the current process, and I'll turn it over to Ashley to talk a little bit about the proposed redesign.
Great. So we've talked about the history, what the process is now, and some of the limitations there. So let's talk about the new program we're proposing. So first, we want to start with what our goals were in this redesign. These are foundational for what you'll see coming up, so I want to spend a moment going through them. So our first goal is to streamline the process. So this will help staff better manage the program and also help residents understand the steps that they're going to move throughout the process before they apply. We also want to recalibrate things so it's easier to get traffic calming where it's warranted. So as Jordan mentioned, sometimes in the current program, if not enough residents sign on in the end, then we don't get traffic calming where it is warranted. And then we also want to create clear eligibility standards to match the right solution with the issue. Because also in the current process, residents can get a speed hump when the data tells us that maybe they don't need one. In the redesign program, we're basing the thresholds to get those physical improvements on the data that we're collecting. We also want to better utilize our staff expertise. So one of the philosophies of this redesign is that it's driven by expertise. That residents see the daily issues on their streets that we as staff can't see every day. So they bring us the problem and we craft the solution. We also want to work in partnership with other programs. So we hear about speeding and traffic issues in a number of different ways. And we want to make sure that all these programs are working with one another and talking to one another so we can strengthen the individual programs and not duplicate efforts. And then finally, right now, residents can apply any time of the year, but there are better and worse times a year to collect traffic data and, of course, to construct the improvements. And so we want to establish a timeline for the program so that residents can understand how long it's going to take to move through this, create some transparency, and alleviate some of those frustrations. So how is it going to work? Residents start by submitting their application with more than 50% of residents along the segment in support. Then we conduct our traffic analysis. We'll have wonderful folks like Jordan create a traffic plan when they look at that traffic data. Then we'll send out a letter to our residents with the data, the proposed plan, the date for the open house, and timeline for the next steps in the process. Staff will hold an open house for all of the segments that are moving through that year, where residents can discuss the plan with staff and voice their support or opposition. And then the open house is part of a 2-week comment period where we will also solicit feedback online and folks can give their thoughts and staff will look at all of that input to see if they need to make any changes to the plan. And then we'll come to you all with a package of all the NTMP projects for that year. And then finally, all of those projects will be included in the bid and construction for the following year. So we think we've made some improvements to what is the current process. So I'll go through a few of those in the new process versus the older process. So the threshold to apply now, as Jordan mentioned, is 5 signatures. By moving that up to more than 50% of the residents along the segment, this allows us to evaluate if there is community support for traffic calming earlier in the process instead of waiting to that 80% later in the approval process like the current program. And since this is a resident-driven program, we do want to see that there's community buy-in. We are also moving to a 7-day traffic count. Right now it's a 2-day count, and this will allow us to better look at traffic patterns throughout the week. In the new system, our engineers will draft the solution. So as Jordan mentioned, right now we require our residents to come to consensus about what kind of traffic calming that they would like to see. So this can lead to speed humps where they're not warranted and a lack of traffic calming where it is warranted. So now the solution will be based on expertise. The comment period, again, goes back to the idea that we are asking for resident buy-in earlier in the process, and so we can alleviate the need for 80% of the residents to, buy into the program much later on. And this will allow us to be a little more efficient. And then finally, in the new process, the NTMP projects for that year will all move through the process together. So this will allow us to have one open house, one council meeting, and one package for bid and construction. So creating a lot more efficiency for our staff and allowing us to get the best possible pricing as well. So in the updated program, we've broken down the types of eligible traffic calming into 3 categories. So type 1 is our low-impact traffic calming. So this would be a speed trailer, a new speed limit sign, some striping. And for type 2, it's kind of the next level up, anything from type 1 plus speed humps. And then for type 3, anything from either of the first 2 types, and then horizontal improvements as well, like medians and chicanes. So we've split our eligibility for these 3 types of traffic calming into 4 categories, and these are determined by the 85th percentile speed that we find in the traffic analysis that we conduct. So you can see the details of exactly what those speeds are in your packet, but essentially, if the data shows that the segment has normal traffic, then you're not eligible for traffic calming. If the segment has mild speeding, then that segment qualifies for type 1, that low impact traffic calming. If the data shows it's more moderate speeding, you're eligible for type 2. And then if it's pretty significant speeding, you are eligible for type 3. You're also eligible for type 3 traffic calming if you have a history of accidents that are attributable to speed, so those mid-block speed accidents. And then also if the segment is adjacent to a school or on a school route. This slide here just has the timeline. So we've already talked through these process steps, but this is what this is what it looks like over the course of a year. So January through April, we'll accept applications. In May and June, we'll do the traffic counts. In that summer, our engineer will take a look at that data and draft the plan and send the letter out to our residents. Later in that summer or fall, we'll have the open house and the comment period. We'll come to you all for a council meeting in later that fall and early into the winter, and then finally everything will be added to the bid and construction process for the following spring and summer. So for us, we have a few short-term next steps. If you all provide consensus to move forward, we'll reopen the program this year with the projects that have been on standby. Like Jordan mentioned, we have paused the program while we've been revamping things. And so there are 7 that are in the queue now. And because we have the shortened timeline this year, we do not expect to open the program for new applications this year and focus instead on the 7 that are on standby. And then next year, we will roll out the new timeline. And here is where we'll stop and have a bit of a discussion before we move on to our discussion of schools. So essentially, we'd like to know if you all support this redesign.
Councilor Ohm?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple questions. One was, you talked about how, I completely agree with the, having the city have more to say, the staff, as opposed to the residents, because I would assume right now that the residents don't have any say when a sidewalk or curb and gutter or asphalt road milling, you're not having them weigh in and decide, right? And this is somewhat similar. But my one question was on the percentage of, I think it mentioned 50% is what it called for. So I know that in city council, we have a couple percentages that we use quite often. One is the 2/3, that's 66%, and the other is the supermajority, which is the 6/8, which is 75%. And so on the asking for the 50%, I feel like is too low. So if I got 8 houses and I got 4 that are for it and 4 that are against it, that doesn't seem to work in my mind. I feel like you've got to break past that 50% mark. And what number is that? I'm throwing out a 2/3 because I know that works for city council. And then the other percentage that was raised was what percentage would it take if you wanted to take out the traffic control device, and it needs to be high. And that's where I think that supermajority, 75% is what I would probably suggest, that if people want to take it out, it needs to be a pretty substantial percentage, pretty high threshold that we're going to take this out because the city has spent money on it. And then there was some criteria under the revised steps, I think it was on the packet, page 4, including the following steps. And I wanted to know, like, what is that criteria meant for residents, homeowners, property owners? And also, there's some other criteria, just asking, like, does it apply to apartment residents, single-unit homes, so renters? Just kind of wondering, like, who's gonna have an issue? And if we have some type of an apartment, and there's smaller apartments, like in District 2, and there might be families, there might be kids running around, and is it just gonna be left up to the single apartment owner of the entire building, who may or may not even live in the state, or do the residents that actually live and work here have a say? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Sure, I can try to address those. For the 50% threshold, I think our intent was to be over 50%. So if you have a scenario, like you said, 8 homes and 4 and 4, that's tough. But we really just want to demonstrate that there's support in the neighborhood for traffic calming. As far as what threshold is needed to remove speed humps, I'm not sure. Steve might be able to answer that. We haven't had to remove one since I've been at the city. I think it's pretty high. Is it 80%, Steve? Do you know offhand?
I believe under the current policy, that's about 80% or above in order to remove pedestrians. Since the inception of the program, the threshold to approve for anything that goes onto a street is 80%. That is the majority, and that helps the neighborhood on that block to keep the device there. And so I think, just kind of give it a background, but to answer the question of removing it, it had to be the same percent or greater, and that was 80.
Yeah, so the 50% threshold, that was something we came up with. We're certainly open to council's input on that if you guys want to raise that or examine that closer. We're open to that. I think there's benefit in that because you have less of a risk of it being removed further down the line. As for the property owners versus renters and the apartment buildings, we did want to get renters engaged because right now the current policy doesn't allow for that. It's just property owners. Renters don't really have a say. We feel that they should have a say because they're the ones who live there and experience the traffic conditions. And like you said, the owner may not even live in state. So our goal is to be flexible on that. We don't want to be very rigid with this policy. It's not really going to be codified. We're willing to work with residents. If the owner supports it, then that changes the denominator. It's 1 out of 1. If the owner doesn't support it, we're certainly open to the renters trying to get support from, if there's 5 units from the 5 other renters, and then that denominator just becomes 5. So we'll work with the resident to achieve whatever that threshold is. That was kind of our intent in that. And I don't know if I answered all your questions. Okay.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for bringing this updated plan to us. Can I just verify, did you say that you had 53 projects and only 16 were approved? Is that the right number?
That's correct, since 2014. And that's not exact. We just went through the folders, the approximate, that it's pretty close.
And that definitely screams a need for an update on this program. And I appreciate it. And I do like all of your suggestions. And maybe to address Councilmember Ohm's 50%, maybe if we could just change the language to more than 50% rather than having to put a hard number in there. And then my next question is, you said you have 7 of them on the back burner that you're going to put in for this year, and then the whole program will start brand new next year. What is the capacity? What is the max number that, what would be the cutoff each year?
I think it's yet to be determined as to how this new program works, but we think we can take on more segments. So we had 53 over 8 years. What's that, about 6 or 7 per year? That's about average. We've had, I think, 8 or 9 some years, but 7's right about what I would say is average.
I mean, thank you, otherwise I support this, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Nosler Beck.
Thanks for all your hard work on this. I had questions about the renters, owners, residents as well, and so I'm glad that we discussed that. I just would also highlight that I think it's important that maybe when we're reaching out to different types of homes or residences, that we think about, you know, a way for the application to work. If it is a larger apartment complex or, you know, multi-family type unit, that it could be something that is posted in a public space for people to sign on to, or to just make it as accessible as possible, because I think something that we should try to do in this revamp is, in an effort to engage with renters or people who are not living in traditional single-family homes, is see how we can speed up this process, make it more accessible. And I think speeding it up, which is definitely what I think you all have accomplished with this plan, is an opportunity for us to make sure that people who are renting, you know, if they have pets and kiddos and the street in front of them, the traffic's awful, they might throw their arms up and decide to leave Wheat Ridge if they don't feel like it's moving along fast enough. And so just encourage us to get really creative on that, which I know you all are experts in the community engagement piece. And then also in terms of the app or the application or the petition, is it a petition that goes around? Is that how that works? Or how do the 50% like sign up to do this? Like to be a part of this coalition that's gonna work on traffic calming?
So the current program, it's a petition.
Okay.
We supply the form, and the enrollment process, the resident will write a letter, and then they get 5 residents to sign on. So I think we need to work that out, but we do want to create a specific form that people will use. So probably, yeah, a similar petition form.
I would just suggest, like, if we can have something that is digital or not just a paper form, that we get into the nitty-gritty of people physically having to do that would be great, just because it's 2023. And then I just have a couple of neighbors who, and I've actually I think I talked to Steve about it like years ago, but learned that, and we're gonna start talking about speed humps and bumps and all of that again, but the speed humps, I think the asphalt or something, they start to wear down, and they are started to be, like, they're degraded, and they make it so that they don't do their job anymore. And I don't know if that's part of this process or not, but I do wonder if there's an opportunity for us to, once we get this under control, to go back and revisit and look at the existing infrastructure that we already have in place and see if we need to be doing any kind of updating or putting in speed bumps that actually work.
Yeah, we could certainly take a look at our inventory of asphalt humps. They aren't as durable as concrete. The last few years, we've been putting in strictly concrete, so I think those ones last a little longer.
Thanks again for all the work.
Thank you. Councilor Weaver.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this forward. This is great. I support this. I do have, and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate here, I'm asking sort of a larger question of can we have too much neighborhood traffic calming? Because I live on a major thoroughfare, and I just want us to think about the fact that we have Kipling and Wadsworth, which are state highways, and then we have 32nd and 38th and 44th, which of course are throughways. And what happens is people pull out of neighborhoods onto these major streets, and those of us who have homes that face those streets are often dealing with very, very fast traffic. I think somewhat due to frustration of coming out of neighborhoods with lots of humps and bumps, which is totally fair, or not fair, I don't know. My concern is to your point of I'm thinking of where I live, which is west of Kipling, between Kipling and Youngfield, and there are a lot of older homes that face 38th, as well as apartment buildings that face 38th, lots of kids out. And of course, I've often wanted to do something about the sometimes 60 to 70 miles an hour that I've seen come down 38th Avenue at night, and accidents, and also, as we know, we've had people killed. Are there, and if this is not part of this, but I guess I'm asking the question, if someone like me wants to call in and say, I have all apartment dwellers around me, but it'd be great if we could have some sort of traffic calming, and I know we're gonna deal with 38th regarding other things, but we have some speeding issues we know we have speeding issues at 32nd by the school, by the high school. Are there things that can be done within this program for some of these east-west thoroughways? I'm not thinking that it would be a speed hump, because I think I would launch my truck off that, but just kind of, does this program include that, or is that something different that we need to think about? Because I am concerned that as we build up these neighborhood programs, I do think it does create pressure on some of these thoroughways, if that makes sense. So I don't have an answer to any of that. I just want to make sure we have a conversation about it.
Sure. So the NTMP is primarily focused on local streets, but we do intend to allow collector streets and arterial streets to bring issues to our attention via the NTMP so they can get the support of their neighbors. But we feel like collectors and arterials maybe warrant more of a city project. They impact a lot of people, not just the residents on the local street. So we do want the program to be able to serve as a conduit for residents to notify us about issues on collectors and arterials, but we would then basically take the program over as a city project. As you know, speed humps typically aren't allowed on these collectors and arterials, 32nd, 38th, because of emergency routes, right? Yeah. So we are looking, like right now, 29th is an emergency route. We're looking at some horizontal traffic improvements, which are basically medians and chicanes, like you'll see on Ward Road has that. Those are an option. But whatever we do, we need to work with the fire department and emergency services. So we're looking at some other options. There are speed cushions and things that might work. They're basically speed humps with gaps for tires, large wide gaps that a fire truck can fit through and not hit the humps, things like that. Right now, what we typically have done or in the past is put up the radar speed boards, and those are somewhat effective, but obviously some people just ignore them. So yeah, we do intend to address collectors and arterials through this program. So
When, we want to know about the issue, but the NTMP is not going to be a good fit for like 38th Avenue, for example. But through the course of redesigning the program, I think one of the things we talked about, including with Maria, our Public Works Director, is we don't have a lot of good baseline data. We don't routinely, on any sort of routine schedule, collect traffic volume and speed data sort of on a rotating schedule on all of our streets, and it's something we should probably be doing. Okay. We're a grown-up city by now, and we have more road issues and concerns. And so it's not captured in this memo, but it's certainly sort of foremost in our mind that should probably be a standing budget item, that we have a contract with a traffic engineer or traffic count specialist, who there's even a firm here in Wheat Ridge, who can provide that data to us routinely so that we can be more proactive on those more challenging segments.
Do you need a council initiative or request to start doing that? Because I completely agree that sort of should go with this neighborhood program that we're looking at our larger arterials.
Yeah, I think we've heard murmurings from each of you in sort of different contexts that that's important. So we're about to start budget season, and it's very likely it's in the budget when we talk to you next.
Great,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of along those lines, did the police just get radar that collects that data now?
They do. They have a, I don't know if it's a new technology. It's new for us. It's not the speed trailers that you see. Those don't collect data for some reason. I don't know why. You think they would? But PD does have boxes that they put out, and you wouldn't know they're there unless you knew they were there. So it avoids hopefully some of that issue of people maybe going faster because they see a speed trailer or slowing down. So yeah, we have a couple of those and we're moving them around to specific neighborhoods to track data. You should see it on social media, and it puts in perspective what's really happening, because we all do see. I do on my street too. You'll see that one car going maybe 60, and then you just you get pissed off, and you think everybody's going 60, which typically they're not. But data is good. It's important to inform what type of mitigation efforts we're going to make.
Yeah, along with Ms. Weaver, I generally agree with all of this, and I think Mr. Ohm brought up a good point about the majority, supermajority, all that. But I do think, just saying above 50% is probably a good threshold there, especially to start like that. I think that gives us a good idea. I was going to ask, and I think, Lauren, you might have already answered it in your question about the data, why maybe we don't just make this a proactive approach to where the city goes in, studies each section of neighborhood or whatever it is, and figures out what needs to go in there without the neighbors necessarily needing to raise their hand to say, help.
We can. I mean, so if we got a phone call and it was sort of egregious, we wouldn't say, sorry, you have to wait and go through the NTMP. We certainly, I think what we wanted to do with this program is to sort of shift the framework from a speed bump entitlement program, which requires 80% of agreement, to let's use engineering discretion and judgment and take the temperature. Yes, there's some consensus, we need to do something here, and then we can add the layer of technical expertise and calibrate the intervention to the issue. So, but in terms of doing it sort of on every street, frankly, it's probably a resource issue at this point, and it's also why we needed to make this program more efficient, because we used to have somebody solely dedicated to this kind of, and if we still had one person solely dedicated, we could probably take that approach of working our way district by district. So we, if there is an issue, I mean, Jordan gets these a lot. People submit service requests, or people go to you and we get the emails, and we are cataloging those. It becomes sort of a data management, looking for patterns, trying to be efficient and thoughtful with the time and resources that we have. There are some communities that have just sole staffs dedicated to neighborhood traffic programs. That hasn't been our history. But we're hopeful that this sort of modification, tweaking of the levers means we can be quicker and more efficient at deploying things when we learn about them, how we learn about them.
Are there any streets or neighborhoods right now that you guys just absolutely know need traffic calming, but the neighbors have just kind of said, no, we don't want it, or?
Not to my knowledge, do you know?
The Parfait Street, 44th to 48th, was one that had a pretty substantial speeding problem, and they just couldn't get the signatures. So that would be one. There are probably others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are probably a few.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally speaking, the people speeding in a neighborhood are the people that live in the neighborhood, right? So you don't want to, okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not me, it's the guy next to me.
Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for bringing this forth. I really appreciate the streamlined approach, and I think it'll be more effective and efficient. I did have a couple of questions, and Lauren kind of touched on mine in regards to the timeline right now of what that timeline looks like. And it sounds like if there is something very egregious that we won't hold until a year later, because looking at that timeline, it would be more than a year before, from beginning to actual construction. So I don't know if you can maybe touch on that timeline now versus after this is implemented.
So the timeline now, we just take them as they come. We get applications all throughout the year, so each segment is on a different timeline. We may be preparing plans for one segment while we're doing the neighborhood meeting for the next. And some of them lag on longer than others. We're at the whim of the residents, how long it takes them to gather signatures. things like that. So we're just trying to make it easier for us and for residents by putting it on an annual timeline. So anybody who applies from January through April would have their speed humps installed, if successful, the next year, the following year in the spring. So that would be the timeline. But then also, yeah, we do get service requests throughout the year, typically not related to speeding, but we can discover speeding issues through those service requests. Oftentimes we'll go out and get traffic data if somebody wants a stop sign or something, and then through that we may become aware of a speeding issue. And yeah, if it was egregious enough, we would probably just take a look at it separately from this program. If, say, the 85th percentile speed were 5+ miles per hour over the speed limit, we would probably just take it on and look at it independent of this.
Okay. I agree with the over 50% threshold. And then that kind of leads into my next question in regards to the public input process and like opening up comments and everything. So if in the engineer's opinion, we do need to have some sort of traffic calming device, and yet it's no longer supported by the residents in the area, whether they don't like the method that we want to implement or what have you, and when it drops below that 50%, are we still going to, use our best judgment and expertise and move forward? Or if they no longer want it, will we choose not to?
That's a good question. I think we would need to weigh the likelihood of that speed hump being removed. If we're approaching 80% disapproval where they could get it removed, then I think we would maybe need to take a step back. But yeah, if there's an egregious problem and we don't think that the speed humps would be removed in the future, I think we would probably just move forward. That's my thought.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this, because I think this is something that we get contacted about a lot. And when we're talking about residents, okay, in the neighborhood, is that one person from each home that can sign this? How does that differ from apartments? So, you want to count how many households there are on a block, and you have an apartment building that might have 20 apartments in it, and then at the very end, oh wow, you didn't get 50%. So how does that play into it, the apartment thing, as to the people who live there all the time?
Yeah, well, one of the things, your first question, I think we're looking at households, not, if 6 people live in a home, we're not saying that half of them need to sign and all of that. And then when we're talking about apartments versus individual residents or single unit homes and things like that, we're really trying to gauge general support in that neighborhood. So, that 50%, that more than 50%, we're gonna work with our residents to find out, what does this look like on your block? Is your block all single unit? Is your block mostly single unit and, 2 duplexes? We're gonna do this, I think, a little bit more on a case-by-case basis. And for, a large apartment building, maybe it is just the property owner, and if they don't sign on, and half of the other units do, half the other homes do, then we can still move forward, So we're gonna be able to work with our residents to figure out what works for their individual situation.
Yeah, that's good, individualized. I also think having the traffic trailer for a week is a good idea. And also I hear from people, well, it was the wrong time of year, okay? It's busier in summer than it is in winter, and that is true, okay? So having a timeline like you have from January to April, putting out the applications and then having your open meetings where you collect all of the petitions at the time and people can talk about it, is a good idea. And how do you think you're going to get this out to the public?
I mean, after we hear from you all, you know, we'll work with our folks in communications to do a big communications push before applications open in January and get all of our ducks in a row of, you know, here's exactly what the petition process looks like, here's, you know, how you submit your application, whatever that looks like, so that we can hit the ground running in January and make sure that people in 2024, we are all on the same page, us and the community, with how it works.
Yeah, that's good. In the connections or
Yep.
transcript or Gazette, whatever would be helpful too. I think being organized like this, it's just been kind of up in the air, you know, and people are waiting, okay, when are we getting this hump and all this kind of a thing like that. So I think it's excellent to be organized like this where everybody knows what's going on. And then it also helps them not calling city staff all the time, right? So I think this is a great thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple more comments, questions is, one comment is I definitely support the timeline for, you can't just submit this anytime. I think that's gonna be great for helping council and staff set budget. So I think that's a really good idea. And just to keep everything on track for the rest of the staff. The one question I did have though is there, are chicanes, is that something that's in the toolbox for the city? And when you look at issues on a street, do you have different criteria based on speed and say the width right away that you could say like, oh, this one is too small for chicanes, or this one would be the right size, you know, kind of like a Goldilocks, and that you could apply, like I know on 41st by Wilmer Davis, there's a combination of some speed humps, a speed hump and island. I don't know that it's maybe as effective as some other ones, but it's something a little bit different. It gives a little character. There are some streets in Wheat Ridge that these local roads have very wide right-of-ways. And we all know that generally the wider the street, the faster people perceive they can go down that street.
That is exactly true. Yeah, when people have a big, wide, open road, they tend to treat it like a runway and go a lot faster. So chicanes are absolutely an option.
Will you
They're-
describe what a chicane is?
So a chicane is, instead of a median in the center of your road, it's like two medians on the side of the road. So they're often installed with a median, so you kind of have to weave around them, and that weaving movement slows you down. You have to slow down to maneuver around them. So they're often hard to sight because people lose parking when we put them in, and you can't block people's driveways. So we've tried some roads and we just can't fit them in. So yeah, it definitely the lane widths, the access configurations, all of that plays in. Some roads are too narrow. We need to maintain about 10-foot width minimum for our lanes. So, you know, if you have a narrow roadway that's 25 feet flow line to flow line, it's hard to fit two chicanes in there and keep your 10-foot, two lanes at 10-foot minimum width. So yeah, it's a case by case basis. But we do like to install those when we can. They work pretty well.
Do you have any examples, like locations right now in the city of those where they exist?
There's a good example right by my house on Teller Street, between 32nd and 35th. And it's a series of two chicanes, median, and two more chicanes, so you have to weave through. That's what we're looking at on 29th, potentially. There's a couple more locations throughout the city. Ward Road has some between 32nd and 38th. And then in front of Wilmore Davis, like you mentioned, there might be one or two more locations, but can't recall.
There's 52nd, like by Ectors, is those pointy things that come out. They're kind of a pain.
Yeah, that stretch is not.
That's awful, because you have to stop traffic for one side to go, and then it took away parking for the homes, you know. But-
That's Arvada. Is that not Arvada?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Let's not take on their problems.
It is, I've driven down it, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think they're kind of too far out into the street. I think I know what you're talking about, but,
Thank you, Mr. Bernard.
yeah, we look at all our turning radiuses when we design them, so we make sure that emergency vehicles and buses can get through without going over the curb, or we look to install a mountable curb that you can roll over and it won't destroy it.
I had a couple of questions. What does the typical signage look like for a speed hump? I've seen some that are sort of little, red reflectors or something next to it. Do we have signage that alerts the public that they're coming up to one, or it doesn't seem like a lot of consistency in the signage?
Yeah, in the past, we have some signs that say bumps, speed bumps. We've been consistent, I think the last few years, we just say speed humps ahead.
Right.
There'll be a sign under it that says next 1,000 feet or next 3 blocks. And there will be those signs in advance of the speed humps in both directions. And then adjacent to the speed hump, if we don't have curb and gutter, we'll often install like a wooden post, a wooden bollard with reflectors. So sometimes people will try to go around them if there's not curb and gutter. So oftentimes we don't like to install them when there's no curb and gutter, but we can sometimes do it if we put bollards there so people can't go around them. But that's where you'll see the reflectors at.
Okay, so there'll be sort of a more standardized signage package that would go with those? And have we noticed any drainage issues relative to speed humps?
I haven't. We look at drainage, make sure that the gutter flow is not going to be impeded. All the ones I've looked at haven't been an issue. I think it really takes a pretty significant gutter flow to cause a flooding issue, but
Okay.
I haven't witnessed it yet. We do take a look at it when we
Okay.
design these.
Good.
Like this last week, you mean?
We had other issues going on. Counselor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to ask if we have consensus to move forward with the changes to the NTMP program with the additional language to change to add more than 50%.
Looks like we do. Okay. Is there any more discussion that we need to have around this issue right now tonight? Okay, well, thank you very much. Great presentation. I think good thoughtful consideration. So thank you all for being here tonight.
We're gonna, if it's okay, we'll keep going. It's the same slide deck, right, to talk about schools? Does that work?
So we will talk about school routes a little bit now, particularly for Prospect Valley and Stevens. As you know, both are taking on new students next year. This is just a diagram or a picture of the two school districts, or the current school district and the school districts that will be in effect next year. The current school districts on the left, as you can see, Color Strand will be absorbed by Prospect Valley and Wilmore Davis by Stevens. So pretty much everything west of Kipling Street now will be going to Prospect Valley, and everyone east of Kipling will be going to Stevens. So we wanted to look at the routes that new students would be taking from the closing school districts. So we created this map of our traffic and pedestrian infrastructure. It's kind of hard to see at this scale, but we have all our traffic signals on there, our four-way stop signs, flashing beacons, radar speed boards, our rectangular rapid flashing beacon crossings, and our school zones, which you can kind of see in the gray boxes there. So this is a blow-up of that map for the Color Strand and Prospect Valley districts. And then on the right, you can see the traffic calming that is nearby Prospect Valley. We laid out what we thought would be likely routes in green here. And you can see it's a challenge to get students from the Color Strand district from the north to Prospect Valley because of the natural barrier of Clear Creek there. We also have Lena Gulch to contend with further to the south. So we looked at the likely routes, and as you're aware, it's going to be hard to put in sidewalks before the school starts in August. So we looked at some alternate things we could do to improve these routes. Pilot projects, we looked at these, the first two pictures show crossing flags that can be used at intersections, and then crossing guard potentially for construction zones. And then on the bottom, we have striped shoulders, which are almost serve as striped sidewalks for pedestrians. So taking a closer look at Prospect Valley, I'll just run through these routes pretty quickly, the routes that we think students will take. So Route 1 from the north it's going to collect students along 44th. And then we think there's a possible crossing of Clear Creek. If they go south on Moore Street, they can cross Clear Creek at the existing bridge. And then there's a dirt path that'll take them over to Oak Street, and they go south to 38th and then over to Parfait, and they can get to Prospect Valley. You'll see Prospect Valley down there at the bottom in pink. Sorry, I didn't provide any context there. It's kind of hard to read these. One concern with that route is it takes students off the beaten path. They're not on a public street, and they're, walking through a secluded area by Clear Creek. So some parents might have safety concerns about that. So we provided an alternate route there in yellow along Kipling Street. Kipling currently has sidewalks from 38th to 41st. There's no sidewalks from 41st to 44th, but there is a dirt social trail that's fairly well separated from the street. So we do think that's a viable route, although it could be improved if we were to install sidewalks from 41st to 44th. Students would travel south along Kipling then and either go down 38th or cut down Lee Street to 35th. So we looked at some potential near-term improvements, or actually 2023 improvements that we could maybe do this summer for these routes. Sorry, lost my place here. So one of the first things we could do is on Oak Street. There's a sidewalk gap between 38th Avenue and 38th Place. We could stripe a sidewalk there, and you see what that would kind of look like in that lower right corner. And then 38th Avenue, we'd add some signage to show that it's a pedestrian route. And then at the intersection of 38th and Parfait, we would look to add those crossing flags like I showed in the previous slide. And then looking at some improvements beyond 2023. So we classified these as near-term improvements, which would be maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, and then longer-term improvements, which would be maybe 5-ish years. So the near-term improvements would be just Oak Street, that segment that we want to stripe. We would just replace that striped sidewalk with actual sidewalk. And then for the Clear Creek, the crossing there, we would make that dirt path concrete. We would pave that to make that more of a formal route. And then also we would take a closer look at Oak Street, collect traffic data, and see if any traffic calming is warranted there to make that route a little safer. In the long term, I think we're looking at sidewalks on 38th Avenue now from Kipling to Youngfield. I don't know where that project stands. I think we're exploring funding options for that now, so that could be, that route could be significantly improved in the future. So moving on to another route, just a collector route from the west, basically along 38th Avenue. 38th Avenue has some sidewalk gaps, obviously, but again, there's pretty wide shoulders and dirt paths where students can walk fairly safely. I think we could do some education and outreach, just telling students to walk on the left side of the street so they can see oncoming traffic. That's always a good idea. I think most kids probably do that already, but that might be good to get out to the schools, get that information out. Improvements we can make to this route, again, just crossing flags at 38th and Parfait, and then the long-term improvements, again, are the 38th sidewalk project that may happen in the next few years. Looking at a couple other routes from the west, Route 3 along 32nd Avenue. 32nd Avenue has pretty good sidewalks already, not many gaps, so that's a fairly safe route. There's a signalized crossing at Pearson, so students can cross there and go straight up Pearson to access Prospect Valley. And then another collector route along 35th. There's a crossing there over Lena Gulch, an existing crossing, and then kids can either go down Swadley or Sims. I think we have right-of-way there. There's no path now, but that would be a future improvement as well, is to improve that crossing and pave that. We've talked to Parks about both of these potential crossings at Lena Gulch and Clear Creek, and they're on board. They think that would be a good project, so we think that's a viable project as well. And then a couple routes from the east, just route number 5 is 35th Avenue and number 6 is 38th Avenue. 38th Avenue, sidewalk gaps again, but adequate space for walking. 35th also has sidewalk gaps, but it's much lower volume road, so probably a safer route for kids. And one of our proposed improvements for 2023 is to stripe a sidewalk on the north side of 35th. And that's shown what that would look like in the picture there on the right. Longer term, we would look to just replace that striped sidewalk with actual sidewalk. And then 38th Avenue eventually will have sidewalks as well, hopefully. This is kind of hard to see, but this summarizes the immediate improvements we'd look to do in 2023, mostly striping, crossing flags, and things like that. Did a rough cost estimate on this, and we think we can do it for probably about $24,000. So that's all I have to present on Prospect Valley. I don't know if we want to break and talk about that, or if you want me to get right into discussion about Stevens routes.
Do we have questions on that one? Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that at one point in time, we used to have crossing flags at 38th and Parfait, and so that was part of that local works project that was doing that. But I read through all of your recommended immediate improvements. I agree with all of them, and I want to say that it's been said before that we're a creative and scrappy community, and I think that this is actually I really appreciate $24,000 is definitely something we can fit into our budget and, and get this done for our safe routes before, school starts. And so I appreciate that. And I do just want to, for those that are watching, we are hopefully, trying to find some funding to address 38th Avenue from Kipling to Youngfield, which would help both of these schools quite a bit. So the only other thing I want to mention, though, is that I know for sure Prospect Valley and Stevens probably also does it. They have twice a year a bike and walk to school day where they talk about pedestrian safety and stuff like that. And so maybe hooking up with those schools to, give a presentation to their students on those days would be helpful. I know they have one at the beginning of the year and one at the end of the year.
Thank you. Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is actually applicable to both situations, but I think that Education Coalition, council, and then staff, and maybe even some of our service organizations could work together to get volunteer crossing guards. I know when I was in elementary school, traveling from my home to Pennington, when we crossed 44th Avenue, we had a gal that was local that helped as a crossing guard both in the morning and in the afternoon. And there were actually sometimes more than one person that would kind of alternate in between that. So I think that working with those organizations, we could potentially come up with something particularly, and I know we're going to talk about this next, but with Wadsworth and it being really unsafe just because of the widening project, and not having, crosswalks. We should probably have some extra safety precautions in place.
Thank you. Counselor Weaver.
Thank you. Looks like really great plans. I just want to make sure that we include the stormwater issues, because it's a really, whenever the beginning of the school year starts, I have students that will try and either cut across the farm or come through the sort of canyon of Lena Gulch. And of course, after seeing, the floods like we did last week, I mean, it's 50 feet across, and just, it always terrifies me when I see kids. I mean, it's just a natural attraction, right? And they're going to be walking right by where Lena Gulch comes out towards the rec center. And so many kids, I mean, because it feels like it's a quick way, and it is a quick way. But for those of you who aren't familiar, it becomes a walled creek, basically, from 38th all the way over to Parfait and the farm. And if someone were down there when it's very dangerous, but it's also the coolest place ever. So, just educating kids about being down in that area, and maybe even having signage on how to get out, because there isn't any way to get out between Parfait and where it comes out at Miller. Is it Miller where that square is?
About there.
But I've often worried that, and I don't know if that's just even some climbing, some ladders like I've seen downtown for what's downtown? Cherry Creek, and all the other ones.
Yeah.
Anyway, just in our education, I just want us to remember stormwater issues and the fact that we have these great amenities that look really cool but are also very dangerous when it gets wet.
Thank you. Counselor Noslerbeck.
Thanks. Really appreciate all the work on this. With I just agree with everything that's been said before too. So with the long-term needs for sidewalks, is that something that would require kind of the same type of thing that we're doing with the speed bumps and the, working with neighborhoods to get the okay for sidewalks? I understand probably not so much for 38th, but on some of those side streets, this will come up also in the Wilmore Davis conversation, but along a Parfait, or I can't remember, or Oak, I think, was the one where, a lot of Wheat Ridge streets, people really love that there are no sidewalks. And I've dealt with that even when we were trying to walk to or bike to Wilmore Davis, there aren't sidewalks. Would we have to go through that same process?
It'll be a little bit different than the NTMP, and probably different still than the 38th West, but you're right. We have, as a city, chosen sort of not to invest in sidewalks, so we don't have a terrific model for how do you prioritize, and then how do you prioritize sidewalks over parking or whatever else the neighbors have come to appreciate and love about their street. So we have a future study session, I think, on sidewalk connectivity, where we'll sort of start to talk more about where are the gaps and what would the process look like. And yes, there'd be a neighborhood engagement. There's always a neighborhood or public process as a part of a design project. Our wheels started spinning when sidewalk gaps was a part of a potential bond, because it's exciting, but also not everybody's going to be excited about it. And sort of when do we say this is our prerogative because it's a community, greater good, versus the sort of what weight does the vote of those individual residents have? Yeah, we're conscious of that. We haven't solved the problem or sort of designed the process yet, but you're right, it will need to involve the
I
public.
just think that probably, at least for me as a counselor, I probably will be using any of the kind of Band-Aids that this project is for this coming school year as an example to show why we need sidewalks in a more permanent way. So, and the last thing I just throw out is that the next Education Coalition meeting for Wheat Ridge is on Thursday at the Visitor Center at 3:00. And so I'd love to be able to take even your presentation with me to just show folks that this is what we're talking about and see if we can get some engagement to have at least some volunteers to help with the implementation of this. So thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to talk about the connection between, on the, the Clear Creek Trail coming over the bridge, and then it connects down to Newman Street. Would there be any possibility that, and I'm very familiar with it because I bike through that area, I understand that that little spur, that 41st Avenue it's a dirt gravel road. It's kind of steep. It's hard to go up or down, especially on a road bike. But would it be possible, would park support widening that little social trail, to whatever the smallest reasonable, that we could connect it to the Newman, because that really does connect the other neighborhood across the Clear Creek. Has that conversation come up?
I think we're flexible there. We did talk to Parks about a couple options. Instead of cutting over to Oak Street, I think we looked at cutting southeast over to potentially Miller. I don't know if we looked at Newman in particular, but from our discussions with Parks, it sounds like they're fairly open to any ideas to improve that area. The route over to Oak it was all on city property. There was a pretty steep staircase there that looked maybe like it's not ideal, so we could certainly explore other options there.
Is that the one that comes north of Newman, is that all city-owned then?
I don't know if the Newman one is. It looked pretty close. It ties in, the one we've proposed ties into Oak, and it was kind of right up against the edge of city property.
Okay.
So we'd have to take a closer look.
Okay. Because, yeah, the nice thing about that is it would, the car traffic can't go through. There's some bollards and stuff right there. That would make it a lot safer for people traveling through that trail.
Yeah, we will take a look at that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm all for everything you've suggested here. I think that area is very big. Prospect Valley's articulation area is very large now, especially coming from all the way north towards I-70, and some of those students are going to be, I looked at Counselor Weaver when you were describing that path from 44th all the way up to Prospect Valley. That is a long walk for some of those kids. So I agree with all that. I think the one thing that I think you mentioned, and I think that we should explore it more with Parks and anybody else we need to, is potentially putting a path, more of a formal path from Lewis Meadows Park down Lena Gulch towards Prospect Valley. So right now, anybody from those neighborhoods that are near Color Strand have to go either down 38th or 32nd, but if we had that path that would cut down essentially where 35th dead ends and stops before Parfait and all that, that would be a really, really great for those kids in those neighborhoods, including mine. So, but other than that, I'm all for it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions on Prospect Valley.
All right, we'll move on to Wilmore, Davis, and Stevens. So this is similar blow up of our traffic map showing just Wilmore, Davis, and Stevens districts. We've tried to lay out some of the likely routes. Obviously, they're all coming from the west, where Wilmore Davis district is closing. With this combination, Wadsworth becomes the obstacle here. And that's complicated by the fact that it's under construction right now. So crossing Wadsworth is really the challenge for getting kids from the old Wilmore district over to Stevens. So currently 38th Avenue is probably the safest way to cross. Obviously that's gonna be in flux. I think at some point we're gonna be doing construction at 38th, and by then 44th and 41st will be operational. So these routes are kind of going to be in flux until Wadsworth is done. We also looked down at 32nd Avenue as a crossing. That's really not an ideal crossing. It's pretty dangerous. It is going to be approved in the next few years when we do the Wadsworth Trail project. So in a few years, that should be a much safer crossing. So the viability of that route will be whether or not we can improve the 32nd crossing or not. So crossing flags are an option. I don't know how useful they'll be there because it's a pretty busy street. We could also explore a crossing guard there during construction, but you know, typically crossing guards are a little closer to the school, but this could kind of be a pilot project where we have crossing guards maybe in construction areas. So I'll zoom in on some of the proposed routes here. So the first route to get kids over to the east is along 32nd Avenue. We have pretty good sidewalks on the south side, and where we don't have sidewalks, we have dirt trails along Crown Hill Park. So kids could potentially cross at 32nd Avenue and then go east to Teller and go up Teller Street, where we have some pretty good traffic calming from 32nd to 35th, and then make it up to 38th, where there's a nearby crossing at High Court, a signalized crossing, so that one is pretty safe. If people do not want to cross at 32nd, we would recommend a detour up through Lutheran Parkway, which would get kids up to 38th Avenue, where it'll be safer to cross, and then they just head east and cross at High Court, where there's a signalized crossing. So some of the 2023 improvements we could look at for these routes is, like I mentioned, crossing flags at 32nd Avenue or possibly a crossing guard. And then Teller Street, we can add some traffic calming, basically continue the traffic calming for that segment from 35th to 38th, which would be another 2 speed humps, and then some striped sidewalk on the east side of the street. And then at 38th and Teller, there's a missing crosswalk, so we would put an east-west crosswalk on the south side of that intersection. Also, crossing flags at High Court and 38th. I think that would be a good place for crossing flags. That's a signalized crossing very close to the school. Then the longer-term improvements are filling sidewalk gaps on Teller Street. And we also looked at possibly doing that along Dudley, but I don't think there's any sidewalks there now, so that would be a pretty significant project. Another route is just directly along 38th Avenue. 38th Avenue has really good sidewalks in this area from Kipling to Wadsworth. So this route is pretty straightforward. Sidewalks all the way, cross at 38th, and then take the signalized crossing at High Court. The options, we would also look at potentially crossing flags at 38th and Wadsworth, or again, possibly a crossing guard, and then crossing flags at 38th and High Court. So a lot of these routes have the same proposed improvements because they share some segments. Moving on then, 44th is another viable route. Again, it's all going to hinge on what happens at that crossing there. If we can make that crossing safe at 44th or when the construction is over, kids can continue east to Upham Street and go south all the way to the school. If that crossing is not safe or during construction, kids can cut south on Ammon Street, which has pretty good sidewalks, and then make it to 38th where they can continue to follow that earlier route. Some near-term or 2023 improvements for this route are looking at, again, crossing guards or crossing flags at 44th. Upham Street, I think we've had some neighborhood concerns about speeding there in the past. So that's a good opportunity for some potential traffic calming. It is an emergency route, so speed humps might be out of the question, so we'd have to look at other options. And then in addition to the traffic calming, we would stripe sidewalk gaps along Upham. And then the other 2023 improvement would be on Ammons. For that yellow route, there's a short sidewalk gap just south of 44th, about 225 feet long. We would just do a striped sidewalk there for that missing sidewalk. And then in the 2-3 year time frame, we would just look at replacing that striped sidewalk with actual sidewalk. The last route we looked at from the west was along 41st Avenue, which is pretty good. Good sidewalk connectivity until you get east of or west of Dover. But there's good traffic calming along there as well. So that seems to be a viable route. When the crossing is done at 41st, kids can cross there and then walk down the very wide path on the east side of Wadsworth down to 38th and then follow that to High Court. Until that crossing's done, we'd recommend the yellow detour, which is again just cutting south down Ammon Street to 38th, where it's going to be safer to cross. You can see that green dashed line as well. That's a potential future option that cuts right now through the Safeway Shopping Center. But there's the potential that would redevelop in several years down the road. So if that does, we will make sure we secure easements or right of way to make sure we can do a connection between Wadsworth and Upham along 41st there. The 2023 improvements we would propose are basically the intersection proposals we made for the other routes, crossing flags at 38th and Wadsworth, and then crossing flags at 38th and High Court. Over the next 2 to 3 years, we would look at just filling those sidewalk gaps along 41st Avenue that are west of Dover. And then long-term would be that potential green dashed route through the Safeway Shopping Center. So those are the routes we looked at. This is another summary sheet for Stevens of the 2023 improvements. You can see this is a bit more expensive, $141,000, but that's largely due to the traffic calming we've proposed along Upham Street, which is $110,000 of that. So if you take that out, it's only $31,000. Didn't have good pricing on crossing guards, so I didn't include that in here, but we can try to track that down if that's something we want to do. Also, we're hopeful that some of these striping projects can be done this summer, but the traffic calming along Upham is probably not feasible until 2024. We have to survey it and design it, so it's unlikely we could get that done prior to the start of the school year. But the other ones, I'm hopeful that we can get into our striping contract. So that's all I have. This is just the combined costs of Prospect and Stevens. So if we're to do everything on the list, the total price is $164,000.
Thank you. Go start with Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did want to bring up that we do have flashing crosswalks at 38th and Upham. And we do have on 38th, I think it's Parfait, and then like 2 more blocks down. So we do have a couple of those flashing crosswalks, which help on 38th. But one of the things that I live kind of off of the 32nd and Teller area. When you're going south on Teller, or if you're turning off of 32nd or crossing 32nd and you're going north on Teller, there's that hill right there. And oftentimes there's like, you'll come up on to a pedestrian. And so is there some way, maybe with signage or something that says, student crossing, or something that would make people aware of, like, don't come up onto the, don't come up over somebody might be there, or some way to address it, because it is, that sight line is pretty dangerous right there.
Yeah, I agree. I live right over there. Actually, I was driving home tonight and somebody was parked in that northbound lane, and it was you can't go around them just because you can't see, so I had to sit there for a while. But yeah, we can explore some signage. There's good sidewalks, I think, on the east side of the street there, which is helpful, but we would certainly, in the 2 or 3 year term, we're looking to fill that sidewalk gap on the west side as well, which would be helpful. But we can certainly explore some signage there, some kind of limited sight distance or something, because I agree, that's a dangerous hill there.
Thank you. And then the cross guards, I'm all for paying for cross guards until Wadsworth is done. And I know that I know it's an expense that is not in our Wadsworth budget, the ever-changing Wadsworth budget. But I do think that this is something that kind of came up. We couldn't plan for it, but I think it's important that we find the money to do that. Otherwise, I support all of these. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering, have the schools at all done a survey with any parents to find out how many children may be walking? Because Wilmore Davis is supposed to have buses, aren't they?
Yeah, I think I forgot to mention that when I was going through my presentation. I think Jeffco is offering bus service to kids who are west of Wadsworth. So that is helpful. I think there's probably still some kids we think that will probably walk. So yeah, I think there still will be people walking.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why, when the schools are closing, why they wouldn't do that to find out maybe how many kids are walking, because these are little kids. They're going to be exhausted by the time they get to school, and there's a lot of parents who drive their kids, to school. So I would just think that would be kind of interesting. I mean, okay, 30 kids out of second grade are going to walk or whatever. That's different than kids that are like, fifth grade or something, I mean, it's a safety issue, and even going through Safeway parking lot is like, okay, that just doesn't sound very safe to me. But I just think, why wouldn't the schools think about that? And then also, if there are buses going to be provided from Wilmore Davis area, are the parents going to have to pay for them? Because that's what they've done before. They've been paying for buses.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. As far as any information from the schools about how many kids are walking, that would have been really helpful. I'm not aware of any of that information, but one of the things I think we should do as far as public outreach or education is maybe send a survey to these schools and try to find out how many kids are walking these routes before we invest any money in the longer term solutions, because if nobody's taking these routes, maybe it doesn't make sense, and vice versa. If we have a lot of people walking, then maybe we can accelerate the construction process.
I just can't imagine, these are little kids, and needing to walk that far. I know a lot of parents drive or they do carpools or something like that, but I think getting some statistics on that and stuff, it just doesn't sound safe. So that's just what I think.
Thank you, Councilor Nosler-Beck.
I had a couple other comments, but just I was going to also respond to that a bit. One of the issues that we have is that kids are still choosing if they're going to Stevens or Prospect Valley, so we don't have the data yet. If you went to the schools and asked them that question, they would say, well, our choice school is Stevens, but, they might say, so far it's looking like 30% are going to Prospect Valley or choicing out of the district or whatever it might be. So we don't have those numbers. But I am on the west side of Wadsworth. My kids will have an option. We don't have any information yet on where the school bus will be picking up from and how that works. My biggest concern with the busing option is that Life doesn't operate on bus schedules, and I want to make sure we have a plan in place for those mornings when parents are scattered and someone misses the bus and a kid makes the quick decision to walk to school. They know that they're going to be able to get there safely, or home because they have chess camp after school and they miss the bus. What's their safe route? That's really what I'm trying to get at, in addition to all the other things that you brought up, Counselor Hutchinson. We will get that data at some point, and it's probably that this year with Wilmore too will be a lot of learning and information gathering to figure out what those routes are going to be. Something though that just seems to be a part of the perfect storm of the school closures and then our kids' safety in getting there to school is with the Wadsworth closures. I think we also need, or with the Wadsworth construction, we need to also be considering the fact that a Dudley, an Ammons, an Everett are all being used as cut-throughs to avoid the construction. And they've been used as a cut-through for Wadsworth even when it wasn't a safe route when it was to Wilmore Davis either. And so, but now it's even more dangerous because people are using it as an option to steer clear of Wadsworth. And so I think we need to take into consideration potentially, like, either it's crossing guards or flashing lights, or, I mean, even if we can get, like, I think what works really well, just because I drive it all the time on Dudley, like the police, like it flashes the flashing lights at you to go 25 in that residential area. There's just, I think, an extra amount of attention that needs to go to any of those areas that are those cut-through spots. I really appreciate, I loved seeing that 41st and potential for us to build something that is a crossing through the parking lot, just because any kid or family is used to using 41st as an entrance to Wilmore, and so they will opt for that and not walk all the way up to 38th during construction or anything. And so I think us thinking forward as that being a safe crossing is really great. You all were given a really challenging feat that it was like, here and make that part gravel and make this part never have worked, and then also a construction project on top of it all. So I really appreciate all the thought that went into it. When you first put the slide up, Jordan, I was like, you didn't even think about 44th. And then you had a whole really great plan. So I really appreciate all of the consideration, because I'm really emotional about this, but this is my kids and all the people that I love going through this. And we're all so concerned. I was just texting with a bunch of moms who are watching right now. And this matters so much to us because we just want to all stick together on this one. So we're with you, and just keep plowing away on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One point that I'd like to bring up too is that even if we don't have a lot of students walking necessarily, if we make the route safe, then it may be a choice that they'll be able to make. But also, it's a good point that we do kind of need data. We won't be able to get that data before school starts. And probably not until middle of the year-ish, right? Beginning of school is always you hit the ground running, and it's super busy, and there's also still a lot of changes that still happen for the whole first month. But it's definitely something that it's not like crossing guards on Wadsworth at those two places is something that's set in stone for the whole year. So if we get the data and it's not working, or we have found a gap, then those are things we can address later. But this as a base plan, I think, is a really great base plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Ms. Hutchinson asked about busing. Busing is free next year for the students that are, at least for the students that are moving to different schools, which I guess, and we won't know those busing routes until next year either, probably, and if they have enough bus drivers to cover the busing routes. But I think it's important that we also make sure that we have safe routes to those bus stops too. and those are typically in neighborhoods and around that way too. So that's something to think about too, as we're kind of seeing what's going on. If they're picking up on streets that don't have sidewalks and things like that, maybe we need to work with Jeffco, or maybe we need to look at that. So can we go for a consensus to move forward with all of the?
No, I've got another.
Sorry,
I got someone else ready to speak, and
Okay.
that's Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment that having grown up in a very, very small town with very little traffic, having walked, about a mile in kindergarten to and from school, the distance wasn't the problem. It was there wasn't any traffic. And the biggest thing that the kids are going to have to contend with, and I've taken my kids, walked them across, because I'm close to Wilmer Davis, and walking them across Wadsworth pre-construction. And you got to really watch them, and it's nerve rattling. And now with the construction going on, I am 100% behind, whatever we need to do to have crossing guards to help the kids, because there's going to be kids without parents that are they're going to cross for one reason or another. The parents might be working. So definitely as a city, we just have to, this is something we have to do to get those kids safely across. And we can take it, and I've ridden the buses as a kid, and it's like, yeah, where are you gonna go to meet that bus? And it has a schedule, and it's a time thing of, would you want your kids out there, your little ones, standing by the bus by themselves? Hopefully, they're not going to wander off. It's tough, and so there's going to be a lot of different choices, and we just have to be flexible and really advocate for safety for the kids getting to the bus routes. And even apart from the schools, one of the reasons I moved where I moved to was because I wanted access. I didn't want to live somewhere where I have to get in my car and I have to drive 10, 15 minutes to go to the grocery store. So I like, from where I live, west of Wadsworth, of actually walking sometimes. If I want to go to the post office, or I want to go to the grocery store, I want to, cross the street, go to Manolos, I have those options. And so we always have to advocate for safety, especially for kids. And this is going to be it's going to be a tough time with the construction. It's not good timing, but those are the cards that we're dealt with. And I support definitely, having the crossing guards, whatever we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Stites.
Can I get a consensus to move forward with the suggestions for Stevens? And I don't know if we did a consensus for Prospect Valley, so can we do a consensus to move forward with both Prospect Valley and Stevens recommendations?
Looks like we do. Thank you. Any more discussion on this, on our safe routes to school, both of our schools? Okay, well, thank you very much. Great presentation, great discussion. Good. Hopefully we've got some thoughtful, safe things going on. Okay. Thank you. Okay. That finishes our neighborhood traffic management plan update. Staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple quick things while Maria is still here. Do you want to give an update real quick on the overflow issue over the weekend? Maria did obviously a great job. She was spent part of her weekend there, so thank you. There was a lot of other staff members there too, but Maria was on board and spent her Sunday there. So
Happy Mother's Day. Yeah, just very briefly, that area is actually owned. It was a former wastewater treatment plant, I guess, down in that area. So it's at the very west end of 41st Avenue as you go down off of Miller, and there's, well, actually, we kind of showed it here previously, so that whole area. So it was observed by the community service officer early that morning of Sunday that there was overflow coming out of this, what we call a settling basin. So there's several pipes coming into this settling basin, and from there, as it's described, it settles out, and then it goes through another pipe into the Metro wastewater system. That settling basin was overflowing, And so there was, either there was too much water coming into the line, or there was actually, what we found was a blockage. So there was actual raw sewage coming out into the field, making its way down to Clear Creek. So the community service officer called in Metro Fire to get their hazmat staff on team on site, and then Public Works and Parks also deployed on call to try and address it. So it's, if you know that area, it's very wide, open kind of channel and field there. So we started, Public Works brought in heavy equipment, our loader, our front end grader, to try and create some berms to stop the drainage or stop the sewage from going further. Meanwhile, we had called Northwest Lakewood Sanitation District, which actually owns that facility, and their environmental consultant, Ramey, came in and actually jetted the pipe and found a blockage. So they found basically a ball of wipes, which you can't put down into sanitary sewer, combined with a root ball, as well as some rocks. So there was a pretty significant blockage in there that was causing everything to back up. So they were able to clear that out. That overflow stopped. And now then it was time to look at what's the remediation of all this sewage out in the field. So their plan right now is to go through, I believe they were gonna bring out their Vactor today, a vac truck. There's standing pools of water mixed with other items, and so they're going to Vactor that out to the best of their abilities. Then they're going to treat the entire area with lime, and what that does is it kind of sets up the materials, kind of dries it up to some extent, and yet it's not, it also treats it from a perspective of taking away any kind of hazards. And so rather than putting chlorine in, that again could get into Clear Creek, they're suggesting to use lime. Then they'll come through with some heavy equipment, scrape off the surface wherever that material was settled, and then they'll revegetate the area. So that will take several days, probably to a couple of weeks, since it is so wet out there.
Thank you. That's much better than I could have done.
Maria, is this wastewater treatment plant been decommissioned, or?
Yeah, I guess there were several, it was like a actual facility with like a building and tanks and everything. And so there's just this one kind of smaller, it's probably the size of half the dais up here. It's not too big, but that's all that's left. And so again, several pipes come into this area, and then from that point out, it's treated by Metro Wastewater.
Okay. Is there any other sort of decommissioning on a permanent basis, or it doesn't sound like the work that we're doing now is more remediation of the overflow that we had? Is there any other sort of decommissioning that we should be looking for?
No, I think, you know, the cover on this, so it is covered with some plastic, and there's obviously been vandalism to that. So they've actually, we heard from Ramey that the district has within their budget, they're going to put steel plates on it instead of the plastic, just to prevent items from going into it from above.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Weaver.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. Is again, I think they're looking at the lye actually will react with the nutrients within waste products to make it more less damaging to the environment, and basically becomes inert, and therefore it's easier to clean up, and then there's no fear of that getting into Clear Creek again, where chlorine and elevated chlorine levels can significantly affect wildlife.
Councilor Noslerbeck.
So I was just thinking about some of the, like my kid today was on a field trip cleaning up trash along Clear Creek, and I'm just wondering if the creek is contaminated, or if it was contaminated, and if we're supposed to be staying clear from it after a certain amount of time.
Good point. What I didn't mention is that CDPHE, so Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, was contacted, so they are aware of it. And then they're going to get data from Metro Wastewater to see what the elevation and contamination levels are. So the state is actually following up. At this time, we were not aware of anything that we needed to restrict people from either being on the trail nor in the creek area.
Okay.
So we feel that if that had been, that they would have notified us of that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Director.
Thank you. One other quick item. Foothills Regional Housing reached out to us last week, I believe, or the week before, about an opportunity that came up pretty quickly for them to purchase a 24-unit apartment building in Wheat Ridge. It's located at 4097 Vance Street, so that's where Town Center Park is, and the road that goes through the Safeway development, and there's that office building between, there's Town Center Park, there's the road, then there's an office building. It's just east of that. Yeah, you could show it up if you want.
Is that the brand new one?
Yeah,
Yes.
brand new.
Under construction.
Brand new. So Foothills is actually able to purchase this building at a price that is cheaper than they can build something themselves. It's 24 units. They are already under a letter of an intent to purchase it. They're hoping to close potentially in the next week or so. Foothills is asking if the city would like to contribute in any way to the purchase of the building. We don't have a lot of money sitting around for things like this, but we have created the housing fund, which was a recommendation of our housing strategy plan, and we are currently putting money into that from lodger's tax revenues from short-term rentals. I think we're projecting to have close to 800,000 by the end of this year, but we do have at least 400,000 in there now. So I told Lori that Rosendahl, the executive director of Foothills, that I would mention this to you this evening. It's a fairly quick turnaround for them, but I would recommend that the city consider contributing potentially around 400,000 from our housing fund. What the city gets for that, it's a small amount. The building, it's for sale for $7.5 million. Again, I had mentioned there's 24 units. Foothills is planning to use the 24 units, 12 of them for individuals at the 50% area median income, which is, for one person is about 41,000. That's their income limit, and two people, it's about 47,000. So to half of the building, 12 units would be for those folks who are at the 50%, and the other half would be for folks at the 80% AMI. And that is about 62,000 income limit for one person, or 71,000 for two people. If we contribute some funding, we would also have make sure I get this language correctly, we would be allowed to use half of those units for our navigation program, if they're available. We would be kind of first on the list to be able to put folks into that building. So, asking you tonight, can't make any official decision tonight, but if you want to make a consensus, we can bring back the official resolution to actually spend the funding or transfer the funding at a future meeting. But we've talked internally about it. Lauren, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, but this is definitely one of the reasons our consultants recommended that we create a housing fund, is to subsidize projects like this as they come up. This is a very quick turnaround, but these opportunities don't come up all that often. So, any questions?
Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you. Would, okay, refresh my memory. The one that's going to be across the street that they're going to build, that the county gave them a bunch of money for, that's going to have cohabitated offices for counseling, and it's got restricted I think it's like 12 units restricted for those experiencing homelessness, coming straight out of homelessness.
44th and Wadsworth?
Yeah.
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 And so remind me, what is the AMI mix in that building, besides the restricted ones for the ones coming straight from homelessness?
That building is, I think, a 60% average in that first phase. They are going to go, that's a multi-phase project. They're potentially going to have 200 units at 44th and Wadsworth. They'll go up to 80% in some of the other units.
Okay. And then, so they're not going down to 50% in that building, other than the ones that are designated specifically for?
Yes, half the units, 25, are designated for Jefferson Center, for mental health, for,
For those experiencing
Yeah.
homelessness coming from the, yeah.
those
okay.
will be below the 50, but there's going to be, it's an average they use.
This project being basically across the street, I mean, like, you can just go behind
Yep.
the big lots
Go down.
to get
Yep.
there, right? Would these residents then be available for the services that are also going to be co-located at the other building, which is a short walk?
I don't know. I can't answer that this evening. They're typically provided case management through Jefferson Center, so I don't know if they could go to that center or to whatever case management Foothills provides.
Okay. And you said that we would get first right of refusal to units for our housing navigation
If available,
program?
yeah, in the 50% units, 50% AMI, so half of the building would be, we could use for, if they're not filled.
And we project to be able to, we have 400,000 now, we project to be able to, by the end of the year, have 800,000. So basically, it'd be half of our
Correct.
account of what we would be collecting this year.
Yep. And you will be seeing, I think, next Monday, a request to hire a housing specialist to manage this housing fund and to go after additional funding through other means in addition to our lodging tax. So we're hoping that fund's going to build up very quickly with other grant resources very soon.
Okay. All right, I support this.
Counselor Weaver.
I'm really supportive of this. This is a great opportunity, and it's in the right place. So I'm very supportive of this.
Additional discussion? Do we have consensus to move this forward next week?
Great. Thank you. That's all I got.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay. We'll go to elected officials matters. Raise your hand if you've got something, and I'm going to turn around to our clerk and see if he's got anything.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing this evening.
Okay, thank you. Counselors, any, Counselor Stites?
I just wanted to thank the mayor for allowing me to step in and host his coffee on Saturday. It was a lot of fun. Great discussion with all the citizens there, and hopefully I didn't mess it up too bad, and they'll all be back next month again.
And I want to thank you for taking that assignment. We had a very beneficial retreat with Dr. Cog. We've had a lot of success with Dr. Cog over the last year or two, and I think we've got a good group of people there and a lot of interesting things going on. So thank you for taking that. Counselor Noslerbeck.
On Thursday, I attended the Jeffco School Board meeting, and just wanted to provide a little bit of an update that they're starting to look into the second phase of the revitalizing thriving schools or something. I always forget what the acronym is, but it's ROFTS. And just I had made some comments about hoping that the school district will, partner with community organizations and local municipalities as they start to consider their next steps, because there are going to be, closures happening. But I think that this round of this stage in the process, they're really looking to try and engage and work with communities to better inform the decisions and hopefully find some other solutions. So I just would encourage both the council and anybody tuning in who cares about making sure that we continue to have thriving schools in our community. Just reach out to your school district, to our school board members, and let them know we're here to have continued conversations. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Weaver.
Just wanted to, with all this talk of traffic, to remind everybody to be really, really careful especially since there are farmers in the ditch digging out their water pipes on 38th, so.
Okay. Counselor Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to give a shout out to several events this week. So Local Works has a calendar of events on their website. Wednesday, the 17th, is the Wheat Ridge Farmers Market from 5 to 7 at Wheat Ridge Poultry and Meats, which is 5650 West 29th Avenue. And then they're having their Live Local May event on Thursday, the 18th. It's curls and cocktails at the Hendricks Salon, which is 7043 West 38th Avenue, from 5 to 7 p.m. And so they'll teach you how to curl your hair and do some hair tutorials and demonstrations while you have a beverage. And registration is encouraged for that event. And on Saturday, the 20th, they're having a vaccine party for animals. They have a low-cost pet vaccine and licensing clinic. So the vaccines offered for dogs and cats, and then they have licensing for $20, and that will be at Anderson Park from 9 to 1 p.m. And then after that, you can head on over to New Image Brewing. They are kicking off their summer market. So they have a beer garden open from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. They're going to have a little vendor market from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then live music from noon to 4. So some great things going on in District 4 this weekend.
Lots of great things coming up this summer. Any other elected officials' updates or any other business to come before our non-business meeting tonight? We will be back here at our regular city council meeting 1 week from tonight. So if there's nothing else, then we will stand adjourned. Thank you.